to All Things Green. I'm Anton, here with my co-host Shelby to discuss a variety of topics from across the sustainability universe. Shelby, how's it hang?
I'm doing pretty great, but I am, just sitting here in Ohio, and you are a world traveler, so
Yeah.
I want to hear from you.
Pretty much, yeah. So I bought a van for $7,000 and decided to drive it all over God's green earth.
Yeah?
I hit Colorado, Utah, Southern California, Northern California, Oregon, and Washington State.
And Missouri. Let's not leave Missouri out.
No, I left out the boring states on purpose.
No. Just as a little reminder, that's where I'm from. So maybe you
Missouri.
Loved Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri was pretty cool. It was driving for 4 or 5 hours. And,
It's the cave state.
In the heat dome. Mm-hmm. It was really hot. Yeah, it was all right.
Tell us about the places that maybe impressed you more.
Bryce's Canyon was awesome. Bryce Canyon National Park. You got to see the hoodoos. You know hoodoos?
Nope.
Hoodoos are like these, it's red rock out in Utah. And it's basically just like the way that the rocks erode. There's just these standing stone structures, and there's tons of them. And they sit in this valley. And so I watched the sunrise at Bryce Canyon National Park. And just to see that golden hour on the hoodoos was just so dope, so cool.
Yeah, I can see the sun you got on your face.
Yeah,
I know. You look very healthy. You look very.
I'm thriving out there.
You are thriving.
Baked beans and coffee was basically my sustenance for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. I actually did only bake a few spoonfuls of baked beans and coffee before Yosemite Falls, which was crazy. That's Northern California, and I hiked to the top of the falls. And I felt pretty close to death after that.
So what I'm hearing is that you really took advantage of a lot of places in the U.S., but particularly you keep mentioning a lot of national parks.
Yeah. I was not interested in seeing the city so much. I wanted to see what God's creation had to offer me.
Sure. I love to hear it. And how many national parks do you think you hit along the way?
Let's see. I hit 7 or 8 maybe.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I think we might be tied now. We talked about national parks once before, and I think at the time you'd been to Cuyahoga Valley, and that was your national park repertoire.
Yeah.
But now you're expanding that.
Yeah, and you did give me the tip to go see the Great Dunes in Colorado.
Did you like that?
That was pretty awesome.
Yeah, pretty cool.
I hiked to the top of Hidden Dune, and that was just so cool, man. The view was so dope. Yeah, the views. The elevation kind of kicked my butt because I'm a flatlander, but...
That's okay. But you got to see a lot of parks.
Yeah, a lot of parks. And that's what we're talking about today, Shelby. It's going to be a park episode.
I love a good park. I'm wearing my Big Bend National Park t-shirt for those who can't see it at home.
I'm wearing my Big Bend National Park t-shirt, too.
Oh, wow. That's so ironic.
Yeah. So, one of these quotes that have been going around on the interwebs lately is... You're not going to get views like this at your Target in Indiana. Sharon, or I don't remember what name they have.
I've seen that. It's like
some pretentious dude in Colorado, right?
At his Target, but looking at the mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that one going around.
Which is pretty cool. Mountains are cool, but parks don't have to be these grandiose areas to be good for us, right?
Absolutely.
And we're going to talk a little bit about how local governments really benefit from some of these parks. Just having people live in their city, pay property taxes, shop at local businesses. These parks are draws for people to live and work in the city. And so I'm really excited to get into it.
And I just want to be clear that you're talking about all parks, not just national parks,
all
right?
Things parks.
All things parks.
Yeah. Not just state parks or national parks. We're talking about even just your neighborhood park with the playground and the swing set and, maybe a few trees or something like that.
Mine, I can throw out my compost because I do Rust Belt Riders. Shout out to Joe King.
That's the coolest, Joe King. So, for instance, here in Cleveland, we have the Cleveland Metro Parks. And the Metro Parks is what's called a special district. They're kind of a political entity that crosses political boundaries. So, it might cover one municipality and another municipality and another city, but it's kind of one entity that's a governing body that makes decisions and works as kind of a small-time government. on other governments' properties.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. I guess I just assumed that Cleveland Metro Parks was part of City of Cleveland's government.
Yeah, they have like a board of directors and stuff like that.
Interesting.
They're not publicly elected, I don't think, but they do act that way, and they even levy taxes. They have a levy that goes up every now and again that has never failed because we love our parks out here.
Yes.
So that's kind of a cool anomaly.
Metro parks are always rated. Cleveland Metro Parks are always rated some of the best in the nation. So we're really lucky to live here.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of what you're trying to talk about today is like that was a draw for me to come live here, and hopefully governments feel that it's a draw for others as well.
Yeah, so you can live, shop, pay taxes here. And actually, Springwater Parks and Community District, a special district in Oregon, they actually talk a little bit about this. They have a whole website dedicated to why they think that their parks are important. They're basically saying this is why we levy taxes from you, so that we can create this ecotourism. For one, like parks create higher property values. So it's going to, if you wanted to sell your home tomorrow and there was parks around it, you're going to see more of a higher sale,
like a return on investment, maybe?
A higher return on investment with parks near you. On top of that, health impacts, right? Absolutely. You're going to be a healthier person if you're taking advantage of your local parks, things like that. And you're a public health person, so you know all about, getting out and being active.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in a previous job, we utilized local parks and recreation, which often is under parks departments, like recreation centers, I should say, to host classes, both physical activity classes like Zumba or like dance classes or yoga classes. But then we also would have things like cooking demonstrations. So parks can serve as a great place for someone to go be active, but also are utilized a lot by public health professionals to provide public health education and services.
Yeah, community spaces, right? And then on top of that, like if you are a healthier person, ideally you're going to be spending less on medical bills, and you're going to be able to put that back into the local economy as well. And Springwater Parks and Community District, they reference that. Like this is it's an economical solution, which is great because I think a lot of people, they're looking at environment and economy always clashing, right? They're mortal enemies, but it's not so. They are things that work together. And also on top of that, in our work from home environment and our work from home age, companies who have work from home employees, they can go anywhere in the world. They can go live in a van. But if they wanted to pick a home or a residence to settle down in, like you said, those parks are going to be big draws for people for where they want to live. If it's a great park system, or if it's a beautiful area, or if it's just accessible, close to home, like that's a big draw. You don't want to live in like a concrete jungle. You want to live in a beautiful green community.
At least we do. And, you mentioned that, like, you don't get views like this at your Indiana Target thing. But I also think they don't have to be, as you said, these big grandiose views. One of the motivations for me to live in my neighborhood is that there was a park around the corner that's very simple. There's nothing about it that stands out to me as far as its inherent beauty. I mean, there's like a lovely pollinator garden that looks really nice, but it's mostly just a flat patch of grass that gives people a place to be outside. It's got trees. Like I said, I can drop my compost off there. I see kids running and playing there all the time, and I can walk there in about 4 minutes. I know I've tracked the time because one time I put scones in the oven and I thought, let's go drop off the compost before the scones get done. And I had a timer set and I made it.
That's risky.
Yeah, it was risky.
I wouldn't have done that.
You probably shouldn't leave your oven on.
That's on your new home?
In my brand new home. Listen, I'm not giving advice. I'm just saying that that's why I know that I can walk there and back in under 10 minutes. Because that was a motivation for me to have something close by.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the nice thing is, even the Northeast Ohio's municipalities are like super fragmented. We're not like a big sprawling city like LA. We're like a city. Cleveland is a city that is landlocked by other suburbs, which is like landlocked by other outer ring suburbs. And it's kind of like everybody's competing for, this business to come to my city. Like that's like a big point of, like a big talking point for elected officials when they run for office. They're like, I'm going to bring business here, blah, 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 blah. And one way that the region really benefits as a whole is through the Cleveland Metro Parks, really tying together the whole region through the Emerald Necklace and hiking trails and even just like roads. Like we just have roads that connect the entire county through the metro parks.
Define the Emerald Necklace for anyone who doesn't know.
The Emerald Necklace, Cuyahoga County is kind of like shaped like a donkey, and the sorry,
it is. I mean, it is.
yeah, kind of. So the Emerald Necklace is like a trail that spans like all the way from like what is that, Bay Village to Euclid, and it connects up top near the lake too, on Edgewater Park, and it's just this big outline of Cuyahoga County.
Okay, great.
So,
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've never hiked it or biked it. I think it's 53 miles total, and I would like to do that someday.
Cool.
See all of the Emerald Necklace.
Well, you're telling us a lot about why parks are good for us as citizens and residents, and also why they might be good for local governments who are trying to bring in businesses. How do you do that? Like, do you have solutions for cities that want to invest more in their parks?
Yeah, absolutely. So elected officials, I think sometimes there's this groupthink mentality at the local level of like, we have to develop our green space, we have to bring businesses here and manufacturing and whatever. But people don't really care to move to these areas that are just like kind of concrete jungles. Like that's not my taste. I'm not saying maybe some people want to live next to manufacturing, but I don't. But being able to have a dialogue with our elected officials and say, hey, this would be good for our property taxes. This is going to be a draw for our city. If we really want people to move here, we should be investing more in revitalizing green spaces, taking advantage of our undeveloped land, and maybe having the city buy out some of this property, put in like a nature preserve or a hiking trail, and also just hiring like progressive city planners and economic developers who understand that developing a city's economy is not just building things. It's about creating a community that works and places where people feel like they can thrive and take their kids out and hang out and spend the day and enjoy themselves.
And parks help us do that.
Parks help us do that. So I would say dialoguing with our elected officials, I think a lot of them are very open to these kinds of solutions or changes. And even if you can't get them to like just create a new position and hire a city planner that understands all of that, they might think twice about, voting yes on this like cookie cutter development that just got passed through the planning commission. They might ask some questions and make sure that nature and green spaces are valued in the city.
Yeah. Do you know that there's a way to sort of quantify how a city is doing on their parks?
Well, I've heard a little bit.
There's this thing called ParkScore, and I wanted to talk about that in response to you talking to us about why parks are important, how we might be able to measure that, or at least one tool we can use to measure that. Sound good?
Yeah, let's do it, yeah.
Okay, so there's an organization called the Trust for Public Land that I just love. We have a couple friends from Trust for Public Land here locally. They operate nationally, but we've got some local offices as well. And they have a tool, the national office has a tool called ParkScore that helps cities quantify how they're doing in terms of parks. And that is measured on 5 different areas, including access, acreage, investment, amenities, and equity. So how does that resonate with you when you think about those items, when you think about parks?
Yeah, especially the amenities. I know there are some like Cleveland parks that are like just kind of like just grass. And like, I'd rather have a park there than like a housing development.
Sure.
But amenities is like a big thing. I hope we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to look at all of those different metrics through the lens of the number 1 scoring city, which is Washington, D.C., and then also through our city, which is Cleveland. And we come in at like 24 or 25. Sorry, I forgot to write that part down.
That's
okay. We're doing pretty well.
Mid-20s.
Mid-20s, yes, if I'm remembering correctly.
I mean, that's pretty good
for the
nation.
Yeah, for the nation, that's doing pretty well. We said that Cleveland Metro Parks are always really highly rated. Yeah. So let's first talk about access. That's their first metric. DC scores 99 out of 100 here, and Cleveland scores 74 out of 100. And access measures the portion of city residents who are within a 10-minute walk of any park.
Yeah, that accessibility is important.
Yeah. How does that strike you? How do you feel about that measure, just objectively, maybe subjectively?
Walk? Yeah, I think that's like, what is that, like a quarter of a mile?
Depending on the person,
yeah,
sure.
I wouldn't walk more than like a quarter of a mile to a park.
Right.
So I think that's pretty good. Like, I think that's a fair assessment.
Do you feel like the parks you use most are ones you can walk to, or are you willing to bike or drive to parks?
West Park and North Royalton, both places I've lived, they are not really walkable park to parks. Bikeable more in West Park, but even so, like if you don't have a good bike lane to bike there and you're on a busy road, not great. So, I mean, 10 minutes of 10 minutes of walking, I think is a good measure.
Yeah. And of course, we know that that is imprecise because everybody walks at a different pace. Maybe you are a really fast walker. Maybe you have to walk with a walker, or maybe you're walking with a stroller or something. Like
Right.
They use that as their general measure. I think it is technically based on mileage or maybe an average. But that is the first measure they're looking at, is just straight up access. Are you close to a park? Then they look at acreage, and this is measuring the median park size and the percentage of the city area that's dedicated to parks. So for DC, they score a 55 out of 100 here, so they're kind of in the middle. About 24% of their land is parks. Wow. Cleveland scores a 32, and 7% of our land is dedicated to parks, which is interesting. 32 out of 100 isn't great, but it seems like it's not in the worst patch. So I just want to know who's scoring 1 out of 100, these cities that have no land or almost no land. If we're only dedicating 7% and we're still scoring a 32, that feels pretty wild to me. I can't imagine what city is hitting a 1 out of 100 for acreage.
Yeah, because like 7%, I don't know. So like if I'm thinking about 10% of land, like that kind of seems like a lot of parkland to me, to be honest. Like
really?
If I'm looking like at a map and I were to like just take like 10% of that city away and be like, yeah, that's all park.
Which for DC is 24%.
That's
so,
like pretty crazy, like a quarter?
Yeah.
Like more or less?
Quarter of the city's land is dedicated to park space, which I think is incredible.
So who's scoring 100 then?
I know. Well, I didn't go into that, but we definitely can. And just to be clear, this tool is publicly available, and it goes into so much depth. You can look at maps, you can plug in where you are, and it's not just big cities. I plugged in the city that I live in, which is a suburb outside of Cleveland, and that showed up, even though it's very, very small. So you can probably find your city or town on ParkScore, or at least something nearby. So we're talking about acreage, but then we also look at investment. DC scores 100 out of 100 here, and Cleveland scores 66 out of 100. And this looks at a 3-year average of public and private spending on parks, and it also monetizes volunteer hours. So
cool.
Some of this feels a little imprecise to me. It's really hard to monetize volunteer hours.
Yeah.
But you can look at public and private spending and see, essentially, is this community investing in their parks? How do you feel about that as a metric? Do you think that matters when we think about how our parks are doing?
Yeah, I would say so, because I mean, from my experience in nonprofit, if you are able to like quantify like how many how many volunteer hours you're getting, you can apply to like other grants, and that opens you up for more funding.
Totally.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Also, like Cleveland Metro Parks volunteer base is like huge, and people probably see that volunteering as like a way to recreate, and so
absolutely.
I think it doesn't sound precise like you're saying, but yeah, it sounds good.
And the public and private spending is more precise, being able to look at the actual dollars here. So you talked about how Cleveland almost always passes the levy. I think always has passed the Metro Parks levy,
passed.
Which is incredible, by the way. But that also shows that we're putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, that if we say we love these parks and we're using these parks, that we're also voting as a city to say we want those parks to be there for us, and we're willing to spend on that.
Right.
We also look at amenities, and this was the one that you said stuck out to you. DC scored 85 out of 100, and Cleveland scored 60 out of 100 for amenities. And this looks at 6 popular features that you might find in parks, things like basketball hoops, dog parks, splash pads, etc. So how does that strike you? When you think of amenities at parks, what are some of the things that you think of?
Yeah, it needs a splash pad.
Yeah, you a splash pad guy?
Yeah, I'm going to throw my Speedo on and go like running into the splash
Scare
pad.
the children. Well, Cleveland does really well on splash pads, just so you know. We score
I know.
We score really high on splash pads, so you've got plenty of room to wear your Speedo. We also score like 100 out of 100 or 99 out of 100 on basketball hoops.
Yeah.
So good for us.
Yeah,
Lots
good
of places to recreate if you want to play sports. We also do pretty well on rec and senior centers, recreation centers and senior centers.
Yeah, we got a lot of old people.
We do. Any recreation center, but including senior centers.
Okay.
We are an aging city. But we score horribly on dog parks. We get a 1 out of 100 on dog parks.
I don't really like those dogs anyways. I mean, dog parks are like despicable, you know?
It really depends on the dog park. I do know a lot of dog trainers who are like anti-dog park. They think it's bad for dogs. And I'm not going to make comment on that. I'll just say that it is something that people say they want. And DC gets 100 out of 100 on dog parks. Those yuppies. All they care about is their dogs, their dog parks.
DC, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
The thing that stood out to me that actually surprised me on Cleveland scoring is we scored pretty low on playgrounds. So it seems like we have relatively good access to being at a park. But if you're a parent, what is your kid going to do when they get there if there's not a playground? Then maybe they can like play tag or play sports. But I was not the kind of kid who was going to like play with a basketball hoop. Oh my gosh, that required hand-eye coordination. I didn't have that. I needed just like a swing set.
Yeah.
That was my speed at a park growing up.
A nice book and a swing set, and
you know
were
it.
set.
I'd bring my Polly Pockets outside and play in the park because my mom was like, you need to go outside. And I would be like, but I'm living in my imagination.
Yeah.
That's...
My grandma would take me to the playground, like a playground. If she ever took us to like a park where it's just like a creek and like, I don't know, just
a little
green
culvert
space.
And
a little
nothing
culvert.
else.
Yeah, just like I got bored kind of quick. So yeah, those kids do need a playground maybe.
Yeah, so I would say from my perspective, just reading this report, maybe that's a place that Cleveland could invest more, is having more of those spaces have playgrounds. I'm not that concerned about the low dog park score, but then again, my dog would never go to a dog park. The last thing they look at is equity, which I'm really glad is included. Trust for Public Land seems to be really ahead of the game on looking at that. So DC scores an 86 out of 100 for equity, and Cleveland scores a 71 out of 100 for equity. And that's looking at the distribution of parks and park space between neighborhoods based on race and income. So they are being really intentional about saying, okay, so this percentage of your land is park space, or is a 10-minute walk away, but how is that distributed? Is that all in the richest areas of your community, or is that also in your poorer areas?
Yeah.
So those are the metrics that Trust for Public Land is looking at when they create these park scores. It's a good way to kind of at a glance see how a community is doing, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the limitations of these metrics because I think that's important to acknowledge. So we just mentioned that they are looking at equity. Mm-hmm. They are looking at how parks are distributed. But we also know that not all parks are created equal. And so I'm curious, maybe this is deep in the report, because these reports are lengthy and detailed.
Yeah.
But just in that raw score, is that considering the quality of the park? Or is it just that it's there? Because I do know that there are parks that people don't really use because they aren't well maintained, or they become places where sort of unsavory things happen. It's this public space that unsavory, yeah.
Like what kind of things, though?
Well, you might not feel safe in every park, for example.
Yeah.
That could be because of the way it's being used. But it could also be because there's like no lights there. So,
absolutely.
You know, maybe you don't feel like you can go there after dark because there's no street lights or park lights. Or maybe there's no water fountain. So you could go and play, but when it's hot in a nice neighborhood, maybe there's a water fountain, there's those amenities so that you can stay and play and stay hydrated.
Yeah.
And then in other communities, there might not be. So I'm just curious how Trust for Public Land is considering that.
Yeah.
Whether that is included in their equity metric. It didn't appear to be.
Right.
But it might be in their narrative.
No, that's really important because I know in the city of Cleveland in Ward 16, there's a park called McGowan Park, and somebody got shot there like 4 years ago. And people just like don't visit that park anymore, even though it's a safe neighborhood. There's still that like memory of that, and people just don't visit it anymore. Yeah. So like, I don't know, it's like a park that's not being used at all. And how do they factor it in is your question.
Exactly.
You know?
I've also seen stories of, for example, violence, gang violence or gun violence happening on basketball courts. And so they'll take down the basketball nets or take down the hoops so that kids can't use it anymore.
I'm not a fan of that.
Exactly. I'm not a fan of that either. And so maybe that park is still there, but the main amenity isn't. So you're sort of punishing that neighborhood because of some bad actors, which really just means that kids in that neighborhood don't have access to that amenity. So curious how that is factored in or not, and how it maybe could be if it's not.
Yeah.
We already talked a little bit about how a 10-minute walk is somewhat subjective. So I'm curious to know more about whether they take into account the infrastructure around that, like transportation. So maybe it's a 10-minute walk for me, but I'm not a person who can walk. So is it still walkable, quote unquote, if I'm using a wheelchair?
Right.
Are there impairments in the sidewalks that would make it hard if I had to use a walker or a wheelchair? Or maybe is there a way to get there by bus or other public transit if I can't walk?
Yeah. Or are you like just a kid and you're like, I don't know, you don't want to walk on the street or something, you know? Like you don't want to die like getting there, you know?
Exactly. And then the last thing I was thinking about was in that investment area where we looked at raw amount of dollars that were spent in the park system. I'm wondering if that's sort of cost of living adjusted city to city, because DC is probably going to put more money because there are the cost of living is so much higher there that people make more money. And so that percentage of their taxes is a higher raw amount compared to something like a city of Cleveland where the median income is much lower. And so a significant proportional percentage of income might not be the same. So those are some of the limitations I just wanted to acknowledge. But now we've talked about how parks are important for local government, for businesses, for people. And also we have one tool that we can use to measure how we're doing for parks.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I hope that people check that out, that resource out, Trust for Public Land. I'm kind of curious what people will find on their own ParkScore. And they can use that to dialogue with their elected officials about, hey, we need this, we need that. We have too much of this, not enough splash pads, stuff like that.
Absolutely. You can also use it to dialogue with us. Tell us about your ParkScore. Put it in the comments. That's the kind of thing we want to see.
Yeah. Well, Shelby, how about you let our viewers know about how they can stay in touch with us?
Absolutely. If you'd like to stay connected to us, be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at One Planet Media. That's ONE1. And if you'd like to rewatch full episodes, check out our YouTube channel, All Things Green Show. You can find all our sources from today's episode in our show notes. And like we said, you can leave a comment and let us know how your ParkScore went.
We'll be back at the same time next week. Thank you so much for being a part of the global sustainability movement.